I'm Erin Autin, Director of Research Programs at Zpryme. I'm joined today by Erin Grossi, the Managing Director of Global Innovation and Growth Strategies at Accenture, and Erin Hardick, Senior Research Analyst at the Utility Analytics Institute. Thank you, Erin and Erin, for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
We actually met up, the three of us, in person back in January of 2020, talking about some of our outlooks for the year, and we had no idea what we would be in for facing a global pandemic. So we thought it would be fun to get together again and just kind of chat, see how things have changed, and regroup now that we're coming towards the end of the year. So Erin Grossi, what are some of the major innovation trends that you're focused on these days, and some technologies that you're most excited about?
Well, thanks for having me. It was a really fun discussion last time at Distribute Tech, and I'm happy to come back and keep talking, because we're always pushing the future. And I would say, maybe if I break down, the things that I'm most interested in, and the technologies I'm most excited about, into, traditional transmission and distribution area, and then talk a little bit about C&I customers or business customers and what's happening on that side of the fence, and then also residential customers. So I think there's some exciting things that are happening in all sides. And so if I start with T&D, it's not necessarily a new trend, but I would say that the push towards adding more renewables to the grid is something that continues to be talked about and explored in ever greater seriousness here in North America. I had the opportunity and privilege to be able to study, the European system and the German system in particular about 5 years ago. And so kind of gained an appreciation for what we call virtual power plant technology, or the ability to sensor, multiple arrays of solar arrays or wind storage, and bring them under centralized command and be able to dispatch them in aggregate in a way that was, similar in comparison to, baseload generation source. And so, now you look 5 years later, and we do have, North American utilities that are taking that technology more seriously and looking to apply it to the US system. So they're asking questions about that sensoring capability, the regulatory structure that will need to be in place in order to facilitate more kind of virtual power plant styles of connecting assets for community distributed generation, or just to be able to load more renewables to grid, more storage to grid, as is required in now certain parts of the country, the Northeast in particular, or California, Hawaii, the ones that are extremely progressive. So they're looking for now, what is that technology? And something that's sort of eluded us has been what I call kind of a closed loop VPP pilot here in North American soil. So I'm trying to combine, a consortia of actors that really work on the grid side out, planning, siting of DER, where it should be located, what the configuration should look like, and how it's going to be economically viable. I work a lot with Opus One Solutions on that type of work. From the grid to edge perspective. So how are we connecting the assets at the edge? How are we dispatching? How are we communicating back to the grid what we're doing? I work, with the German VPP on that a lot, called Next Kraftwerk. And then, we can work with all different kinds of sorts of, I guess, OT, or, who is going to actually help us with connecting the assets physically. And Schneider Electric has been a good partner for me there as well. So I'm just really excited. We're getting close, but it seems that the utilities are starting to understand what that looks like. And, I want more to be aware of the possibilities for making that closed loop pilot happen, so that we understand what the true value of DER is going to be on system. So there's that. From a C&I perspective, as I was saying, I think the opportunity that's exciting now is just that they're asking so many questions. When I say C&I, I mean universities, I mean hospital networks, I mean, big box retailers, the Targets, the IKEAs, the Krogers of the world are asked. They know that data is such a driver of the economy today. And so they're asking, in an energy context, if you see me on your system, why aren't you coming across with recommendations to me on how I can save money, how I can, add renewables to the system, financial opportunities I might have to do financial contracts like what we call PPAs, or maybe on-site solutions, or why don't you help me with an EV conversion or electrification of my fleets and such, and so, whereas in the past, I don't, they wouldn't have been so proactive in, I guess, reaching or asking for solutions. Today they are. And it's really kind of akin to what I call, the outsourcing of the IT shop in many businesses that happened in prior decades. Now it's really sort of the outsourcing of the energy management to a array of actors that can do this much more effectively in a much more financial savvy way, and can give you excellent configurations that are designed and customized to your business. And so that just opens up an enormous amount of opportunities, particularly for those that are in the business of microgrids, which we talked about last time. There's a variety of actors, especially those that I mentioned, that are entertaining on-site microgrid solutions today, and wanting to know, how that fits with their CSR initiatives, how it actually helps with them with resilience of their operations, and also how it can be more cost effective for them versus, the energy solutions they employ today. So I'm excited about the dialogue. I'm excited about the interest, and also sort of, again, more that customized analysis that we're able to provide, because several, of the competitive energy providers have built businesses in order to be able to deliver energy as a service in various packages. So that's super cool. And then on the Resi side, I'm really excited about trends in what distributed intelligence. And that is, people know Sense, Vigily, Powerly, SMAPI, they kind of pioneered this sense of being able to read e-signatures in homes and be able to tell you at any given time what motors are on in your home, how much energy it's using, any one of those, and then how much it's costing you to run your HVAC system or your appliance or anything really that's on in the home. And, some of them focus a little bit more on the engagement side of that equation. So how do I get you excited about knowing what's going on? And then get you to tell me even more, like almost like a Waze-like device. Sense has that kind of AI layer where, if I didn't know initially that your coffee machine was on or your grinder was on, you could tell me, I can see there's something on. I can't quite pick out what it is because it's small, perhaps, and then you can sort of tell me and my algorithm learn. So they've been training those things, and now Sense is embedded in gear meters, utility meters that are rolling out in 2021. They're also embedded in Schneider Electric home panels and square D breakers, which is really exciting. And, Itron is proposing to do really similar things with their meters and providing that DI intelligence. So that just opens up really the possibilities that we've been talking about for 10 years now on the smart grid, the smart home, and us being able to communicate with people effectively about their behavior, what's on, what might break, what might blow, an opportunity to employ a heat pump, a capacitor that's failing, even safety issues, an arc fault that you might experience with a heating device in your home, a stove or otherwise. So really, really exciting trend. And, we're all over it, helping on all sides of that equation to make sure that that technology arises and becomes real for everybody.
You mentioned microgrids, and that made me recall part of our conversation from earlier this year about how you were looking at more widespread adoption of microgrids, moving from, not just being remote area technology, but places like hospitals and schools adopting them. Has the pandemic shifted your perspective on that at all?
It really hasn't. I mean, I think if anything, it makes us more bullish about the need for electrification. I think the pandemic has sparked all kinds of thoughts about change, and desirable change that we as individuals and societies need to sort of be thinking about and embracing. And climate and health, and being a big part of that. So the contribution that microgrids can make, I think, is resonating even more, obviously, with major investors like BlackRock and Bank of America, JP Morgan, who have really pushed the ESG agenda in, wanting to get a better portfolio mix of companies that care about environmental, concerns. And so I think, we're seeing get much more traction in this regard. And I think the work, again, that competitive energy providers have done, like Engie, like NLX, like Schneider, to really make this easy for companies to understand. Some of them call it microgrid in a box, for a small type of installation that's maybe just kind of solar storage, is much more feasible for universities or hospital networks or anybody to entertain. And then things like electrification of shipping ports or electrification of airports that microgrids can play a role in. Those take many years to kind of come to life. But I think that there's a big opportunity, and again, the financiers are seeing this, to kind of create higher value assets by employing things like microgrids and really modernizing the infrastructure from so much of it was built after World War II and is extremely inefficient and not environmentally friendly in any regard. So many infrastructure holders and investors are thinking about how to modernize and change over in no time like the present, just like we all are kind of thinking about, I think, even just our personal lives and the changes that we're going to make to be more healthy and kind of do better coming out of this.
Erin, speaking of being more bullish around emerging technologies, clean technologies, in June of this year, you wrote an article for the Zpryme guest contributor series titled "Now More Than Ever, the US Needs a Clean, Digital, and Resilient Energy System," where you argued that integrating renewables, developing utility marketplaces for customers, and fostering more innovative cultures shouldn't be delayed. So there are some people that are arguing those things should be delayed. What is their premise for that?
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of a classic thing, I think. There's something about a crisis, and one that has, all crises have economic ramifications to them. This one certainly does. And in a crisis, you kind of think about it like the shore washes up and you kind of see who's vulnerable, whereas they might be able to kind of hide that in better times. You see who's vulnerable, you see who's strong, and it's really I guess it's sort of akin to a do or die situation. And what we see consistently, classically, is that those who invest through the crisis and are committed to change and to doing better, as I was saying before, always outperform the market. It takes bravery and courage, to do that, to spend through a time that is difficult. Some people simply can't, right? I mean, they're too exposed and they simply can't. But then everybody else, it's just that sensibility in the middle there, that's maybe we should invest more in our core. And that's really where I think a lot of the noise came from early on in the pandemic, especially in the utility industry, was, well, if we can't count on load growth, and in fact, its load, is going to fall off a cliff this year, and it is, I mean, 6%, average globally reduction this year is what's anticipated overall. So, I mean, it's a big hit, and we can't count on people paying their bills because, people might be out of work and so on and so forth. Then how could we possibly invest into the future? I mean, we got to just kind of button down and get with, clip our existing ops and make sure that they're optimal. And, what we would say is, I mean, that's just a matter of course. You're always optimizing your core and, how it performs and trying to get as much out of that core as possible. But to say, as we did hear people saying, that now it's going to be 10 more years before we do anything really interesting with any of the new technologies. I mean, that's just fear, that's coming out there about the future, and a fear and a reticence to kind of invest. And again, those that kind of take that course tends, the fortunes aren't favorable to them. Fortune favors the bold, and it's just true. I mean, those who are consistent about their investment strategies, at least, and if not getting more aggressive, tend to do better. So
What are some of the more specific benefits? I mean, you said they tend to do better, but what are some of the more like specific benefits of continuing to invest during this economic downturn? What would those be?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people take notice, to your behavior again, kind of in a crisis, like your employees take notice to your behavior and how you take care of them. Their employees take notice to the way that you are consistent about your values overall as an organization. So if you have been, or you are an organization that has proposed to do better, on the environment or in any regard, employees be watching to see what do you do when you're under stress, and that's a great sign to know whether that's just kind of marketing and puff value for an organization that they like to kind of hang their hat on, or whether they're truly committed to getting, an industry changeover. And so I think, we can see again on a personal level and then also on a business level, the crisis is rather sort of revealing, in that way, about where people really stand. And I think, just from an economic perspective, though, again, I mean, the companies that continue to invest through a crisis will be your new sort of economic winners. And you can look back in history to every financial crisis we've ever seen, and that will have been the case. So it's usually, as a consultant now, it's not actually that hard to convince industry leaders of that. It's always kind of that struggling middle that was where a lot of the fear kicks up about, can we really make it? Can we continue on that future path that we laid out? That's what I'd say.
So speaking of the future, looking ahead to 2021, we've got a new administration coming in. At least at this point, it looks like there will be a new administration coming in. What does that mean for the energy industry? What sort of shifts do you see happening based on this new administration coming in?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's such exciting times for energy, and mostly, because of what I said, this kind of broad scale recognition that I don't think is specific to the United States at all, but is really, the health of the planet is important. The fact that, having breathable air and drinkable water, and, these things are values to us, and we see a decline obviously in a lot of different areas. And so, this need to kind of make sure that we are transitioning the system to get better performance on, again, all these different environmental factors and health factors, I think is exciting. And to have major financiers back that as a big part of their agenda, and really come to the forefront at World Economic Forum and other major, sorts of places, platforms, areas, to be able to kind of espouse that and to get behind this movement is really exciting. Here in the United States, we actually, the market kind of drives our, our policy making. In Europe, the policy making agenda can prescribe something to the market and say, our values are such that we want to see a changeover in renewables, and we're going to ask you to get there, and you can figure out how you're going to get there, but we want you to do this. That doesn't really happen in the United States. So the good news is that renewables and, just clean tech in general did well, even without a president that was really supportive of the agenda over the last 4 years. I mean, Arena has it at, I think, 70% cost reduction on overall renewables globally over the last 5 years. The market churns. I mean, China obviously had a huge amount to do with panels coming down, the cost of solar panels coming down, and now storage coming down, and we see that kind of reverberate globally. So, the market is affecting us here in the United States, and we're doing well with clean tech, even again without a majorly supportive environment. So then you think about now, if we do have a president that actually is supportive from a values perspective, and believes in the need for us to do more on climate change, et cetera, we'll probably see obviously a comeback to the Paris Accords, and we'll see more supportive types of measures out of our government that would have happened, I think, anyways, because the way the US system works is, if you have economic winners, then the government will start to step in and support them more. And the reason why we kind of knew that this energy transition would be successful, because you have the convergence between major economic players in IT and tech coming together with major economic players in energy to forge this new system. Those are two huge bastions of the economy that stand to gain, even as some older, groups are kind of, managing a decline. And so, again, I mean, I think just knowing that this is likely to be supportive and not necessarily picking winners, as we have seen, doesn't always, the government isn't always great at that, but at least being, generally supportive and supporting industry's calls for, more supports wherever needed for really, out there edge, kinds of innovations. But then also just, from a policy perspective, requiring, greater amounts of, I guess, cognizance out of the business community, et cetera, towards their environmental disposition and, their emissions and everything. So I think it was good times for clean tech and transition, and now it's going to be even better.
Yeah, sorry, Erin, before we wrap up, I wanted to say, I think that's been one of the biggest or most important transitions in the renewables narrative, is that they're economic winners. I think a lot of people think that proponents of renewables are like eco freaks, like clean energy, like clean, like environment, like people who are really driven by just the aspect of clean. But now it's more, it's starting to become, well, like these things are cost competitive. It's not just about the environmental impact. And that's been one of the biggest and probably one of the most influential transitions in the narrative around renewables.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I mean, the United States will be tough on that because, again, it's not really kind of a values-led, prescriptive, regulatory type of environment. It's much more, it has to work from an economic perspective for the United States to get behind it. And there's a lot of, minds that work on how we're going to make that happen. I think for me, as a former, sort of chief economist of a company studying this from a global standpoint, if you have Europe kind of getting behind this, for more kind of values loaded reasons, the sustainability reasons were very high on their list. Also security reasons, tied to kind of old fossils were big for them. And then you have China, and greater Asia really getting on board with this transition because of more both economic and health issues, seeing their potential for industry creation. But then also really, bearing the brunt of kind of, all the health effects of their industrial process. They made such huge investments that, the United States was going to be compelled, because the cost of all these pieces, parts was going to come down. And now we're seeing that is the case. And, now we're getting to that tipping point where, wind is cheaper, the cheapest supply, and we'll just keep going with this. And so you'll see that kind of change over. And that's what matters, here in the US. I mean, there's so many of us that actually do care about health and sustainability, but what matters in the US is, that it works for people, it puts people to work, that it creates, vast industries that people can participate in, that it performs better, that we actually get a better result from a resilience standpoint and energy quality perspective. And the great news about the solutions that we see already employed in Europe and Asia and now parts of Africa and starting to come into the US more is that that's in fact the case. So you're starting to really figure, what could be the reason why you would stand against the transition. I don't know. So,
well, I'm excited about 2021. I'm excited to see what happens in energy, and hopefully the three of us will be able to meet up in person again at some point in 2021.
Yes, let's make that happen, please.
Thank you both so much for joining today, and we'll be back soon.
Excellent. Bye.
Bye, Erin.
Bye, Erin.